NCTV45, The Train, anytime on your time. Gentlemen, if you want to look your best with high-quality clothing, then I recommend Main Street Clothiers and Custom Tailors in downtown Newcastle. Mike Caggiano is the owner, and he and his staff have been in the business for decades, and they will always give you the right recommendations. They also carry Rondinelli tuxedos. That's Main Street Clothiers and Custom Tailors, 210 East Washington Street, downtown Newcastle. Call 724-652-3851. Daimio and Olson Law Group, where every client matters. Serving Newcastle, Elwood City, and Youngstown. Daimio and Olson handles criminal law, bankruptcy, civil matters, workers' compensation, personal injury, medical malpractice, divorce, wills, real estate, and many more legal issues. Call any one of their offices in Newcastle, Elwood City, or Youngstown with these phone numbers. Open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Daimio and Olson Law Group, where every client matters.
It could be you, it could be me, it could be everything we see. Given the day, given the time, given the moment. It could be you, it could be me, it could be everything we see. Given the day, given the time, given the moment. Some of it comes.
Bring into NCTV45.
Hi, welcome to the Washington Outsider. This is host Matthew Geiger from the Washington Outsider. Visit us for our latest take on the news of the day at www.washingtonoutsider.org. Check out our blog and our various other posts. Today I kind of wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some events. A year ago, the Ferguson, if we recall, the Ferguson protests took place. We had a lot of violent outbreak, a lot of heavy-handed response. Well, this is around the time of the first anniversary, and I'd written a blog post on it for the Washington Outsider. And as part of that, I kind of discussed how this is what happens in Ferguson is very universal. You see the Arab Spring protests, you go out to the Middle East, the umbrella protests in Hong Kong. You see a lot of the conflicts between different groups, the Palestinians and the Israelis, the Turks and the Kurds. And what you see with them is you see a lot of the common themes that go on in a place like Ferguson. And, throughout the country we've seen the same issues. It was interesting. A gentleman had responded to my post and said it was a good article, but he was concerned that people were making this Michael Brown, who was shot, out to be a saint. Michael Brown he was 18, and he was shot allegedly when his hands were up in the air and he was surrendering to an officer who he had just engaged in a fight with. Now, and this, of course, led to the hands up, don't shoot mantra that you often hear on the news when they discuss Ferguson. The question that this person raised was, well, Michael Brown had a criminal background. Turns out he attacked or was in an altercation with the officer, and he doesn't fit the bill of the saint. Why were they remembering him even though this things came out in light? I mean, at first Ferguson, this stuff wasn't known. We just knew that someone who had their hands up were shot by a police officer, and that provoked outrage. Instead of the local government addressing the issue, saying in a very transparent way, it kept quiet. It said there was they were investigating. They weren't. They were. There was going to be another investigation. They handled it very poorly. And we go back to this idea of government responsiveness. Well, that's a very good example of what a government's not responsive. And obviously when someone gets killed, especially a younger person in a community, by the authorities, there's that extra emotion that drives it, and it becomes a larger issue. So the question is, you know, why are they focusing? Well, one of the reasons is not only that he was a teenager, not only was there racism involved in it, there was a racial element here. It's that it did spark such outrage last year, and they wanted to revisit this. And of course, in this first anniversary, it led to renewed violence. And there were protests, and then suddenly violence again. A lot of it was caused by outsiders from the community kind of looking for an opportunity just to cause trouble. They're the kind of people who see a chance, people are emotional, they're angry, and they come in and then they act violently. They do something violent. They were shooting at police officers, and there was a major crackdown. But at the same time, there were the peaceful protesters, and the police last year who showed up were driving armored vehicles, wearing tactical gear, doing stuff to really distance themselves. And what that creates is this sense that there's a divide here. And you know, when it comes down to it, people are angry about this Michael Brown shooting because it was a police officer who killed him, who claims it was self-defense, and there was doubt that. And when you are in a privileged position, your actions are extra scrutinized, extra. And when you have this kind of immunity from the law, I mean, a police officer can kill someone and not be arrested for, not be hassled. It's seen as part of the job. And when you have that kind of immunity, there's an extra layer of scrutiny from the community. They see your actions as more malicious, intentional. They scrutinize that. They want answers. And if you're not responsive enough of saying, hey, this was not an abuse of power, this was a necessity, and you explain to people what actually happened, there's going to be outrage. It's very similar when you take an account for government officials, comes to developing code, local code. If you develop a code that is too much what is seen as to your advantage or your advantage of your friends, it's going to get extra scrutiny. And if you don't properly explain it, that leads to civil anger, and then that can lead to civil unrest. And the question here becomes, why did Michael Brown's shooting go viral, as we put it in the internet age? Well, again, there is his age, there was the racial divisions, and then there was just happened that people had caught them. Okay, people for years in Ferguson had tolerated kind of this sensation that if you were black, you were less significant, that the white people in charge were more powerful, and you had to listen. And it's not even about racism. You know, you can be divided among race, ethnicity, religion, or, you know, simply wealth. I mean, this happens a lot in communities where there's kind of a in-group that develops, and when that in-group does things that affects the rest of the community without being very responsive in it, that ends up hurting the, and if it ends up hurting the community, then it ends up causing that kind of feeling inside. And at some point, when it becomes some issue that can't be overlooked, a teenager being killed, a child being killed, then there's outrage. And in truth, it's not even about Michael Brown. It's not just about the one. It's about the whole pattern. And he just happened to be, his killing was something that sparked it. And then when people come back and say, Michael Brown was a criminal, he attacked this police officer, he deserved it, it kind of creates even greater push to really almost sanctify these people, as this person who had written to me said. Was what happens is that because these people are so angry, and that when they're saying, well, and it's not about Michael Brown. Whenever it comes to saying, well, Michael Brown is this isn't, your anger isn't legitimate, they say, yes, it is. It's a reaction. It seems like people are trying to delegitimize their feelings, and it's a culmination. So when it comes to these Michael Brown protests, it's not even about the individual. It's about the feelings of the community, and the feeling that the government has been unresponsive, that the government has not explained itself, that it's abusing power, even if it hasn't. I mean, Darrell Wilson, the officer who shot him, there was eventually found no evidence of wrongdoing, which doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't, doesn't mean necessarily the shooting was necessary. It just means that legally there's no culpability there. And that in itself pushed more anger. And then whenever the people expressed their outrage in the protests, they showed up with these heavily armored vehicles. The police were heavily armored. And it makes them feel like they're just being crushed, that their voice is not being heard. And that's the same thing when it comes to economic issues, when it comes to religious issues, when it comes to culture. When there's a group that doesn't seem beholden to the people in the community, that's what kind of builds this civil resistance, this civil friction. And that can, in turn, at the right event, can lead to civil unrest. So right now we have to take a break to hear from some of our local sponsors here in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. But when we get back, I want to kind of continue and maybe put the Michael Brown shooting, the Ferguson protests, into a larger context.
Come dine with us, come dine today. If you could use some real good food, there's a place not far away. If you could use a drink or two, or a place to go and play, come to Gallows Italian Villa today.
Mary's Middle Eastern Restaurant. Yes, fine Middle Eastern food where elegance and charm meet old world goodness. Great lamb, chicken, and so much more. Mary's, located on Long Avenue in Newcastle. Call 724-652-2447.
The Crane Room is a restaurant. The Crane Room is a bar. The Crane Room is a banquet facility. The restaurant will please you time after time with their diverse menu. Ask about their daily specials. See the menu at craneroom.com. The bar gives you an abundance of choices with 35 beers on tap and always changing. Their banquet services are always to perfection. The Crane Room, located at 3009 Wilmington Road in Neshannock Township. Call 724-656-1553.
Hi, welcome back to the Washington Outsider on NCTV45. This is host Matthew Geiger from the Washington Outsider, washingtonoutsider.org. Visit us for our latest take on the news of the day. Today we're here talking about kind of the resurgence of protests in Ferguson, Missouri, of course, and the Michael Brown shooting by police officer Darren Wilson. And of course there's a large racial element to it, but a lot of the reasons this led to such violence can be seen universally. Whether you're talking about Ferguson, you're talking about just various fights, the Middle East, the China, Russia, inside the United States, Trayvon Martin. We see violence throughout the whole country over protests. It's not about the one specific incident. It's about a culture, a kind of civil friction that's been building up. And usually when something like this happens, that friction splits. It's almost like when you think of an earthquake. An earthquake, the tectonic plates beneath the land will pull together and push against each other. And then at one point, could be something minor, will break that. And you'll have a huge explosion, a huge shaking of the earth. And that's what a Michael Brown incident is. It happens, it's something that breaks, and then that leads to civil unrest. And part of the problem, to kind of tie it into this notion that we've talked about on the Washington Outsider before of unresponsive government, is that government that doesn't respond to the needs is a government that's neglecting the needs of the people. And when the government neglects the needs of the people, they feel as though the government is illegitimate, that it's just has power to abuse it. And the only way to deal with that is to make government more responsive. When we look at just the overall situation of these civil unrest, you see poverty in places like Ferguson. You see racial disparity. People feel there's racist undertones. And at the same time, there's also just a very cultural isolation there. The people in power are in their own little world. And that can be seen in a community like Newcastle, Pennsylvania, where people don't feel the people with the power, the people either whether they're affluent financially, or they're control of the government, or they're part of their own little community. Those divisions, when events like this happen, create they lead to this unrest because friction has been building all these years. And what happens is you don't just have people reacting to something like Michael Brown or the Trayvon Martin shooting. You have people overreacting, and you have mistakes are made. Police officers make mistakes. But whenever you've had this whole buildup, this history, people are less tolerant for mistakes. They respond violently. And why was this particular, when someone's killed, and especially a child, it becomes symbolic. Even if there were wrongs done by that individual who was killed, this is seen as a means, as a very illegitimate thing. It was seen as a reason to say, you guys can't deny that. And then, of course, they come back and say, well, the officer was in the right. Well, that's kind of sparked outrage. And what needs to happen in that response is the government in Ferguson really needed to reach out. And why are we talking about this a year later? Well, protesters came out again to remind him. And of course, why Ferguson? Well, Ferguson went viral, and there's a lot of people from outside of the community there. And the reason is simple. This friction, this social friction, this feeling of division, this unresponsiveness of government, this community kind of feeling of being disenfranchisement, is felt throughout the country. And so when a lot of these people in Ferguson aren't from Ferguson, but they're drawn to it. And then, of course, there's the violent people who the police are there to protect. And so when we look at the Ferguson issue, we see that there is a lot of this kind of this whole unity. And what it is that this event resonated with the country. It resonated with the people of Ferguson, and then it came out to the rest of the country, and there's this friction. And so what it tells us is that there were a lot of issues going on underneath long before Michael Brown. There's a lot of underlying issues. The fact that this happened again a year later shows that this country hasn't dealt with those issues, that Ferguson hasn't dealt with, faced those issues, hasn't done much to really head on. In fact, when we say, he was a criminal, he was fighting with the officer, it appears as though we're making excuses. And really, what it's done is it has distracted us from the core issues. If we don't face the core issues in the community that are causing this social friction, that lead to this social unrest, then the issues are never going to get solved. Well, we need to take another break to hear from some of our local sponsors. But when we get back, we're going to maybe look at some of these issues and see what we can do, what's not being faced.
Tuscany Square Restaurant, 3470 Wilmington Road, where old world charm meets today's modern conveniences. You'll enjoy their spacious, comfortable seating, their fresh ingredients that go into making every dish, whether it's pizza or that just right entree. Tuscany Square Restaurant, they're here to serve you. Call 724-654-3065.
Whether it's a scheduled appointment or same-day service, DiCaprio Carpet Cleaning offers 24/7 service for commercial, industrial, and residential, as well as fire and water damage restoration. Using state-of-the-art technology, DiCaprio Carpet Cleaning experts are ready to professionally clean your carpet today. Call DiCaprio Carpet Cleaning for a free in-home estimate. Thank you for making us Lawrence and Mercer County's largest carpet cleaner.
And remember, nobody gets your carpet cleaner.
Joshua Son Rehabilitation Center. From the moment you arrive, you know that you're in the right place. Dr. John Wrightson listens first. He pays attention to detail and then makes the determination. Joshua Son Rehabilitation. We make the pain go away.
Hi, welcome back to the Washington Outsider on NCTV45. This is host Matthew Geiger from the Washington Outsider, washingtonoutsider.org, for our latest take on the information of the news of the day. Today we're here talking about civil unrest, civil friction that builds over time, and the break that kind of happened in Ferguson, and then the return to that a year later. But I want to kind of shift gears now, talk about some other kind of issues that relate into this. If we look at, let's go to politics. I know it's 2015 and the news, the media wants to go right to it, the politicians want to talk about it, and none of us want to. I mean, it's not our lives. It's kind of fruitless. One guy's on top. But we look at someone like Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump's, he's like the Republican Joe Biden. And he happens to just say some things. And a lot of times they don't make sense. Then he gets angry. And then he starts insulting people. And it can be amusing. At the same time, there's kind of an understanding. And interestingly enough, the more he does this, the more the press gets angry, the more his fellow politicians get angry. But the more his standing among the voters goes up. It's an interesting dynamic, and one of the explanations I've talked about on, I also write a column for Community Digital News. You can link to it through the Washington Outsider. It's under the column, the Washington Outsider, and I discussed in that a very the interesting dynamic of why it happened, and that was that there seems to be this real dishonesty between politicians and the public. Whenever they say something, we don't believe them. We don't trust them. You had to go so far kind of legitimizing this. Hillary Clinton said she didn't know Donald Trump, and then they show pictures of him at her wedding. I mean, that kind of undercuts. And of course, she's in there's issues where she hasn't been using, or when she was Secretary of State, she hadn't used the government servers for her email that she was supposed to, which created kind of a security leak. And when you go to Donald Trump, yeah, he's crude. He says things he shouldn't. And I wrote, he needs to be he doesn't need to be politically correct. Which means tell people what they want to hear. He needs to be more diplomatic, which means you say exactly what you want, but say it in a way that people will actually listen to it and not just get angry at you. He does need to learn that. But one of the reasons his bluntness is so refreshing is because people run around in circles trying to avoid saying something. Politicians are afraid of scrutiny. And yeah, at times there's an over-scrutiny. There's the wrong kind of scrutiny, and people tend to harass the politicians over these minorly stupid things, but there's important things. And you go to the Hillary email server, the reason people are so angry, I don't know that they're angry. There are people who are angry, but I don't know that it resonates among everyone. But the reason it kind of irritates people is that it's a sense that the top guys don't have to follow the rules. The power elites, the ruling class, the politicians, the wealthy, they don't need to follow the rules. And when it comes to the Ferguson shootings, the Ferguson protests, the Ferguson civil unrest, and just events throughout the country and throughout the world, that's kind of what's driving it. An event here where there's such a blatant disregard from the more powerful people to follow the rules. Someone sticks their hands up, the police aren't supposed to shoot them. Even if they were just in a fight, they're supposed to detain them. It's part of their training. It's controlled. They're supposed to be controlled. And that training is done to ensure public safety, to ensure the police don't have to shoot someone. It's also done to give the officers discipline. At the same time, the government requires Hillary Clinton to use government servers, secure government servers, in order to protect the country from potential harm. Also to give the people scrutiny later on. And whenever we have situations where these people aren't held accountable, where there's such a blunt responsiveness, appearance of hypocrisy, no explanation, no accountability, that tends to drive outrage. And, rightfully so. That appears to be abuse of power. When someone like Donald Trump comes in and, yeah, he's in the wrong for name calling, it's very childish, it's very counterproductive, it makes people not want to take him serious, not want to listen to what he has to say. And he's a very intelligent man. He's wealthy for a reason. It's not just that he inherited, which he did, he inherited some, but he built up his companies. And, he's gone through bankruptcies, if you listen to his reasons why, people can understand more about economics. But instead, they're criticizing him. They're not asking why was this. We need to understand what's the lessons learned here. And that's sort of why people draw to Donald Trump, is that instead of, even though he's a billionaire, he's an elitist by far. If you've ever seen images of his house, the way he talks, he's very much on the he's at the very top of, culturally, socially, he's very powerful. He kind of has that mentality of, the rich man. But why are people rallying to his cause even when he's offending people? It's because he seems to be holding himself accountable. Yes, he whines, but at the same time, he's not being deceptive. He's trying to be somewhat responsive in his bluntness. He's not a very good communicator, but most people aren't. And so I think that kind of resonates. And when it comes to that sensation, the lesson here is that you need, when you're in a position of power, to be more honest, because you're going to be scrutinized more. Whether you're talking about a shooting whether you're talking about budget, whether you're talking about code regulation or code enforcement, whether you're talking about anything that government does, or as an affluent person, people are going to scrutinize you more when stuff goes wrong, and you have to be more responsive. And so that's just some kind of a bit of an add-on from where we are. The news has kind of tied in to what we talked about last time about unresponsive government here on the Washington Outsider. It's very unfortunate that events happen in Ferguson, but again, there's a lesson in everything. From the ashes we learn, we make anew. So, this has been the Washington Outsider, and I hope you'll join us again when we're back. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Have a pleasant day, and thank you.
Welcome to the Silk Road Fair Trade Market, home of those uncommon treasures. Wendy Farmery searches the world over to pick out just the right gift. So stop by the Silk Road Fair Trade Market. You'll be glad you did.
Butts Flowers and Gifts offers top quality flower arrangements and gifts for any occasion. The pros at Butts Flowers and Gifts provide exceptional customer service, and each bouquet is hand arranged. Stop in and check out their wide selection of gift baskets and plants. They provide flower delivery service locally to Newcastle, Bessemer, Edinburgh, New Wilmington, West Pittsburgh, and across the nation. It's Butts Flowers at 120 East Washington Street in downtown Newcastle. Call 724-652-7727 or toll free 1-800-443-7726. The Cedars is a great restaurant with outstanding Mediterranean food. The Cedars takeout menu is second to none, featuring pizza, stromboli, hoagies, their famous lamb on the rod, and so much more. So when you're hungry and you want that Newcastle taste, make it Cedars. Now with 2 locations in Newcastle, 827 Addis Street on the east side and 1101 Highland Avenue. Call Cedars East 724-658-9260 or Cedars North 724-652-7657.